As we move into Chapter 2, Ethics and Public Speaking, this is very important to keep in mind as we talk about building our credibility, but also being ethical about how we present information in a public speaking presentation. So, this is going to be some really good information regarding ethics and public speaking. When we talk about ethics, ethics deals with issues of right and wrong in human affairs. So we have to make ethical decisions where we are weighing our potential course of action against our ethical standards. So, in all types of industry and in career paths, there's a set of ethical scope of practices, code of ethics that we have to abide by. And this is also true for the public speaking process. So, when we talk about ethical decisions, we're talking about weighing potential course of actions against our ethical standards. We are also referring to making ethically sound goals, being fully prepared, and being honest. So when we talk about how does ethical issues apply to the public speaking dynamic, we're talking about what those guidelines are. As a presenter, as a sender of information, we have ethical guidelines and principles that we must abide to. So, in addition to making ethically sound goals, being fully prepared for the public speech, and being honest, we must also avoid name calling, abusive language, as well as putting our principles into practice. We must also refrain from using language to defame, demean, and or degrade individuals or groups. And this goes back to that piece in chapter 1 that talks about being culturally responsive and recognizing cultural practices and recognizing your audience and the diversity of your audience when performing a public speech. We talked about our ethical responsibility with the public speaking presentation, and also, along with being ethically sound and abiding by ethical principles, we must also recognize this idea of plagiarism. And plagiarism is very prevalent as we talk about doing research and as we talk about supporting our ideas when we're gathering materials for our public speaking assignment. So, plagiarism refers to presenting language, ideas of another as our own. As we talk about plagiarism, we need to note that there are three broad types of plagiarism. One is global, the second is patchwork, the third is incremental. Global plagiarism refers to stealing speech from single sources and then passing it off as one's own. As we begin to talk about supporting your materials, researching your ideas, it's going to be very important and pertinent that you understand what types of plagiarism exist. And so that we can be very careful in avoiding making these mistakes. Not only is this important for public speaking presentations, but it's also important ethically no matter what your discipline is. If your professor says for you to write a paper, review the literature, and then summarize findings of that literature, it's very important that we recognize others' work and that we present that in such a way that it gives credit to the original authors. The second type and broad category of plagiarism is patchwork. That means that you steal ideas, language from two or three sources and pass them off as one's own. We will talk about, and as you review the assignments for this course, we are very intentional in making sure that you follow the APA 7th edition format for citing references to ensure that we avoid making any type of mistakes with plagiarism. And then the third type of plagiarism is called incremental plagiarism. And this is failing to give credit for parts of a speech borrowed from others. Now, this slide is very, very important because in the face of technology, in the face of social media, a lot of students use the internet as the source of gathering materials. So it's very important that we understand the relationship and understand the dynamics of plagiarism and the internet. It's really important, and the APA format, 7th edition, I provided a website link for you all in order to make sure that you're citing all of your sources, including the internet source, appropriately. And so, one major thing that they talk about in the text about internet, when you get sources from the internet, is that you cite the sources appropriately from the internet materials. And so, the APA 7th edition will provide you with guidelines and examples of how to do that. And then that you also take careful notes because there's information from the internet that you can definitely bake into your own words and summarize in order to include in your public speech. Okay, we talked a lot about plagiarism, the different types of plagiarism, but we also, under this idea of ethics and public speaking, also need to talk about our responsibility to be an ethical listener. So, what does it mean to perform and apply ethical listening skills? Here we're talking about this is speech making a two-way street, and listeners have ethical obligations. As an ethical listener, we must be courteous, attentive, avoid prejudging speaking and prejudging the speaker, as well as maintaining free expression of ideas. So, as the speaker has an obligation to follow ethical principles, so does the listener. And so it's really important that when you are in the audience, when someone is presenting, it is very important that we be cognizant of what our guidelines are when it refers to ethical listening skills.